joining us. We have posted tonight's meeting as an EFPBC meeting in the chance that we had a quorum, just to be safe with open meeting law. It looks like we do not have a quorum, but we'll be watching that as we go. We're going to do our best to get through this in about 20 or 25 minutes with a very quick overview of the Lynch replacement project, and then hand it over to Rich Mucci, who's joining us on the webinar tonight. Rich is the chair of the select board, and they were the primary sponsors of question 2 on the January 7th ballot, which seeks some funding for an operating override that will go to the stabilization fund. But the primary purpose is to fund some traffic and safety improvements on both sides of the Lynch site. So Rich is here to share that with us tonight. We will wrap up with an update on project costs and FAQs and next steps, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience when we get to that point. We do have a hard stop tonight at 7:30. Happy to end early if we run out of questions. So I'm going to stop sharing that, and I'm going to introduce real quick before I jump into the website who's with us tonight. So Jay Nardone is the chair of the EFPBC. That's her school building committee. So Jay, you should wave. Frank Hackett, superintendent of schools. He's also a standing member of EFPBC. Mark Scott, who has his camera off, he is a joint appointment of the school committee and the select board as the architect representative on the EFPBC. Mark is also a Winchester resident. Lisa Matrandola is with us. She's an EFPBC member and chair of the Disability Access Commission. And then we have Rich Mucci, as I mentioned, chair of the select board. Supporting us is Meg White from the Engineering and Planning Department. Frida Canavan is our recording secretary. And then we have some important consultants with us tonight. We have Charlie Hay, who's the principal in charge from TAP-A Architects. They're the designers for the new Lynch, as was the case for VO and for Ambrose. So they're very familiar with Winchester. And then Vivian Varbedian is with us tonight. She's the project director from Hill International. They are the project OPM, which we'll describe in just a moment. So let's see, that was easy to go through because we don't have a quorum. Let me minimize one screen and I'll go to another, Jay. Pull up the home page. There we go. Okay, so what I'd like to do tonight, there's no PowerPoint. We're going to continue to use the project website, which I think has been helpful for us in these presentations, and we used it at town meeting. So what I'd like to do just very quickly is share with folks that the information that I'm going to be speaking to tonight, as well as a summary of what Mr. Mucci will be speaking to, can be easily found at lynch2025.com. That's our project website. On the home page, you'll find some information on the upcoming override debt exclusion vote and the override for question 2 this coming Saturday on January 7th. Some links here on how you can vote by mail if you need to. The home page is always going to have this blue field, important updates on the project. It's a little big right now because an awful lot has happened between October and as recently as the week of Christmas. I'll speak to that in a moment. A summary of the building project in terms of the size of the project. It's a little over 100,000 square feet, some of the key program elements, and some images that Charlie and his team have developed to date. For those who want to really go back in time, the homepage also is kind of a reverse chronological record. We're going to continue to update this with some tabs on the site that kind of describe, let's say every 3 or 4 months, we'll update this. You can scroll down here and kind of get a sense of where the project started and some of our, in terms of our early site exploration and concepts that were developed by the project team. And then we have a project schedule. Well, really it's milestones. It's not really a detailed schedule, but I think Charlie will speak to schedule in a few more minutes. So we've gotten a lot done. This project started when we were invited into the eligibility phase with the state back in December of 2019, if you can believe it. That was that long ago. So in terms of updates, in October, the MSBA did unanimously approve proceeding with us for the Lynch replacement project. They approved a project scope and budget agreement where they were basically committing the state's dollars to partner with us on the project. That was an important first step. Second important step was for fall town meeting to also approve the borrowing for the project. They did so on Thursday, November 17th. If anybody cares to see that presentation, you can find it right here with a link to YouTube. Town meeting voted unanimously to approve the project, so we appreciate that. The third and most important step then that comes next is going to be this vote on Saturday, January 7th. What really nobody expected we would be putting up here on the website is this December update, which I'll get into in a little more detail shortly. But somewhat to our surprise, on December 21st, the MSBA's executive board, out of concern for continued cost escalation in construction of institutional buildings, voted to basically raise the cap, which is the basis for reimbursement with their partner districts, and they included Winchester. So they had, remember, just approved the project in October. They decided to go back only as far as October and basically raise those numbers. And so that's really tremendous. What this means at the end of the day is an increase of nearly $2.9 million in state funding. So that's nearly $3 million. What that means is we won't be borrowing that in Winchester. So that's really welcome news. And as I said, we'll get into a little more detail shortly. So without spending too much time on it, for folks who care to understand why we need the new Lynch, we do have a page which is called Lynch Today. I welcome anybody to visit this. It describes the current building. It's 83,000 square feet, never intended as an elementary school. It was designed as our junior high school. You get a little bit of a flavor for the deterioration that we have in the building. Much of this is frankly building elements and envelope building system components that have simply long outlived their useful lives. And we estimate that if we were to just tackle the urgent and critical renewal and replacement items that we have at Lynch today, it would cost about $43 million. That's, again, just the urgent and critical items. We'd still be left with an 83,000 square foot building that doesn't meet the needs of the district, with really an inadequate space program. So this is an interesting page for people to visit. In terms of what we were going to do about that, we would simply go to the History, MSBA, and Master Plan page. The school committee did update our school facilities master plan in 2017. We do so about every 10 years. And as a part of that process, we identify major capital projects. The school committee identified strong need to replace both the Morocco and Lynch elementary schools. And so we submitted a statement of interest to the MSBA, which is the Massachusetts School Building Authority. We submitted that in the spring of 17, I believe it was. And we were still wrapping up the high school project at the time, so we were told to get in the back of the line. And in fact, it took 3 swings on this project. We submitted Morocco and Lynch each 3 times, and then ultimately the MSBA did opt to partner with us on the replacement of Lynch. So that partnership is fundamentally a financial one. You'll note here these last 2 bullets, the VO and Winchester High School projects, were what the MSBA calls core replacement projects. At Vincent Owen, we were fortunate enough to receive a $10 million reimbursement grant from the state. And at Winchester High School, it was a $44 million grant. And as I said just a few minutes ago, the grant for the Lynch Elementary School has now grown to over $20 million. So we're very excited about this. The MSBA's funding comes from the Massachusetts sales tax. 1 penny of every dollar, or 1% of every sales tax dollar, goes to the MSBA. And the MSBA then redistributes that to local education agencies across the district that they're partnering with. So there's a little bit of history here about that process that we went through with the MSBA, why Lynch and Morocco were priorities. If you want to learn a little more about the master plan and all that went into that, there's a link to that directly here as well. So as I said, we were fortunate enough to get selected to proceed. To do this, we have to build a project team. We have a standing school building committee in Winchester. It's the EFPBC. That's our Educational Facilities Planning and Building Committee. There's a list of those members here on the right. We are your friends, your neighbors, perhaps your colleagues. It's a group of engineers, architects, project managers, contractors. We've had industrial hygienists, geotechnical engineers, attorneys with expertise in design and construction. And as I said, the superintendent is a standing member. So this is a really helpful and diverse group with a lot of experience in the trades and in the design and construction industry. The EFPBC has served us well for many years, supervising and sort of managing many of our major capital projects for the schools. But in addition to the EFPBC, the MSBA requires that we go through a designer selection process for an architect, and we go through a project management selection process as well. So as I mentioned, Vivian is with us representing Hill International. They are the OPM, or what we call the owner's project manager. Our project, Vivian's colleague is Hill's project manager, Andy Vo, and they really help us manage that relationship with the MSBA. It's a helpful partnership in terms of the reimbursement, but it can be a lengthy process, a lot of paperwork. I don't want to say it's cumbersome, but it's very detailed. There's a lot involved in it, many requirements and sort of hurdles to clear. And so Hill is very helpful to us in managing that process. Then, of course, we also had to hire an architect, and we, with the designer selection panel, hired TAPE architects. TAPE were the architects of record, as I said earlier, on VO, as well as on Ambrose back in 2005, 2006. So Charlie has a large team working with him on this project. You see them listed on the left. So everything from the educational programmer that got involved in the project early on to our mechanical, fire protection, plumbing, structural engineers, and so forth. These are all live links. So members of our community are welcome to click on these links. In many instances, they will bring you to a lot of the K-12 work that these professionals are doing today, and that may be of interest to you. Brief description here about the process in working with the MSBA that I won't really dwell on, but having built the team, we did have to come up with a number of options for the MSBA to consider. Because this is a neighborhood elementary school, we kind of knew where the site was, and it was here. The Lynch site is very large, as Jay is fond of saying. It's both the largest and most restrictive site the EFPBC has ever had to work with. It's a little over 18 acres, I believe it is. It lacks adequate parking. It's got 2 separate unconnected vehicular access points. You've got neighborhoods on each side. We've got wetlands to deal with. You've got Horn Pond Brook, which connects to the Aberjona. And of course, you've got the play field that we need access to as well. We have no disturbance zones, DEP wetland protection areas, a floodplain, and a floodway. So really a lot of restrictions to consider. Last spring town meeting, the select board put forward a motion to transfer water department land. This was formerly a groundwater well field. It was put in the 30s. It was abandoned in the late 1950s. And it's necessary for the school committee to have control of that property for the project to proceed. So town meeting approved that, and we appreciated it, and it allowed us to develop a number of exciting options that were considered. For anybody who cares to learn more about that process, go to the design page, and again, scroll down to the bottom. Everything here is in reverse chronological order. You'll find that in the early conceptual stages of the project, I believe it was 11 different options were evaluated. They ran the gamut, and this is required, by the way, by the MSBA. We had to evaluate addition, renovation. We had to evaluate new construction with different phasing. So just many different options, including just simply renovating the building as it stands today. That was going to be a non-starter for reasons that we've already described. So we started off with 11 options, narrowed those down to 6, trying to work our way towards a conceptual model that we were excited by. We got it down to 4 options a year ago this month, which is hard to believe. And then in early spring, it was in March, we narrowed it down to 2 different options. And we chose the option substantially on the left, which involves no renovation, but in fact, abatement and demolition of the existing building and a new build just north of the existing Lynch that Charlie will share with you in more detail here in a moment. For folks who care to know a little bit more about what those floor plans look like, we have some key plans that are on the website. And again, Charlie will walk us through these momentarily. The building is sort of organized vertically with our youngest learners at the lower levels and our oldest learners up on top. As the team develops images of the interiors and exterior of the building, we'll continue to populate those here on the page. And we also wanted to speak to what some of our project goals here beyond simply the space program for the district. Winchester has a climate action plan that was really an important document going back to the RFP on this project. Winchester seeks significant reductions in greenhouse gases, and our institutional buildings are significant contributors towards those. So Lynch, we're excited to say, will not rely on fossil fuels. It'll be an all electric building, and our goal is for a zero net energy project with both roof mounted and ground mounted solar. And again, Charlie will speak to that in a moment. So we have a design page here on the website that I hope people will, if you're not already, familiarize yourselves with. Let's see, I've talked about site, I've talked about design. I'm going to save my remarks on traffic and swing space until Mr. Mucci is done. So I think what I'd like to do now, Charlie, can I hand it over to you and let you jump into the design piece? And then when you're done, we'll ask Rich to jump in on some of the neighborhood traffic work. Does that work for you?
Sure, very good. Thank you. Good evening.
You should be able to share.
Okay, let me try it again. Yes, now I can. Awesome. Can we see that?
Looks good.
Okay. So good evening. As Chris said, I'm Charlie Hay from Taipei Architects, and I'm going to quickly, so I think Chris has pretty ably described the project to you. I think the opportunity here is to see some of the images you saw very small on the website and at a larger scale on your screen, I hope. This is sort of an aerial view that was developed conceptually of what the site and the building might look at a kind of from the air. And it's a really easy way to understand the context of the neighborhood and how the building would sit. So the building is going to sit, the proposed building would sit north of the existing Lynch. And it would sit south of the existing playfields. So it begins to unify, the proposed site plan begins to unify really the south part of the site and the northerly part of the site. It continues, as Chris mentioned, to have the two vehicular access points that it's always had. And it continues, and it now has two distinct pickup and drop-off locations and an easterly and a westerly parking area. And one question that always comes up is, oh my goodness, can people drive through the site now? That will be controlled. There's the potential for gates, and there's a potential to allow vehicles to come through if it's public safety or for maintenance or for snow plowing. However, if the town and the district elect to do so, they could also close off the central roadway and continue the practice now of having two different ways on and off site. So that's the nice thing there, is you can have a little bit of flexibility about how that works. There'll be a significant play area in the front of the building, as you can see in this image. So that gives you sort of a context for the site plan. This is a larger scale site plan where you can really begin to see the large scale play, multi kind of grade play areas. There's a defined and distinct pre-K play area. There will be play in the front for students of all ages. There'll be an outdoor learning center space in the front that'll probably be covered, which is kind of nice, and a large sort of turf field for play. And then in the north, there's the possibility of a play area located near the fields, which can be used by students. It may be used by the youngest learners. There was some discussion about where this will precisely land. But it could also be used during kind of events at the field. So if you have a older student playing in a soccer game and a younger student who wants to be playing in the playground, you can supervise, you can watch the game plus supervise your younger child. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there with this the way the site plan has been developed. So it should be a nice site plan. There's a lot more opportunities for outdoor learning. There's a lot easier for students to get out and into the landscape. And it should, and I don't like to say this, but we hope it will be an improvement relative to traffic and to parking. As Chris mentioned, the intent is to have, it's an all-electric building. The intent is to have solar as on-site renewable resource that should get us, we hope, to our goal of net zero. It's targeted as a LEED Gold building. So the solar panels will both be on the roof and we hope on parking canopies. And those plans have been being developed and will continue to be developed as the project moves forward. We did do a preliminary solar study, so we're pretty confident we can get the kind of energy generation on site we need to. As Chris mentioned, the plans are organized with the youngest learners on the lowest level and the oldest learners at the top. This is the ground level. There is a main lobby you enter, administration on your right, controlled entry, cafeteria and gym on your left, which means that this zone can really become a community building. And the rest of the building, in theory, can be closed off if you wish to on evenings and weekends and just use the caf and the gym. And in fact, you can get upstairs to the art room and the library media center without going into the rest of the building. So there's a nice kind of zoning of the building horizontally and vertically. The youngest learners are there in yellow. That's their dedicated pre-K wing. It has its own dedicated entrance, its own dedicated administration, and its own controlled entry, much like the main entrance. And then kindergarten is in the center. As we move up in the building, we get to what we kind of consider the lower elementary grades. So that's 1, 2, and 3. Grade 1 gets its own distinct zone, has kind of a transitional year with their own bathrooms and their own kind of grouping. And then grades 2 and 3 become kind of a team with some kind of nice sort of wide corridors and the opportunity for some pull-out space and some sort of non-traditional locations for education, for small group learning and individual learning by students. And again, media and art are off of the lobby. You can get to them by some kind of main supplemental stair, and you can still zone off the rest of the building from those locations. And there are restrooms, of course, across the hall from that for if there's evening use, if there's a town board that wants to meet in the media center, there are bathrooms right there. There are also, of course, bathrooms right next to the cafeteria and gym. And then the top floor is grades 4 and 5, our oldest learners. And there's also a STEM lab that will be available to everyone, but is probably going to be most heavily utilized by the older grades. And 5th grade has its own kind of academy over here as it transitions from elementary to middle school. On every floor stacked are teacher planning rooms. So these kind of cohorts of teachers can gather for, group planning, for, if they need to make a phone call to get a cup of coffee. They'll also act as print centers. So those are right in the middle of the building for teachers. And the nice thing about 5th grade is there's a potential here, because the roof doesn't extend all the way up in this location, for a nice outdoor classroom on that roof. And we've done that successfully in the past, and we hope to do it again here. So those are kind of the plans and how the building is organized. The massing of the building will be developed as we move forward, but this gives you a sense. And again, what's important about an image like this in many ways is just seeing how it sits in the context of the site, how the play areas work, how the roadways work, where students get dropped off by car and by bus. And in this case, the relationship between the fields to the north and the kind of site to the south. And then here is the rear of the building. That was the front of the building to the south. This is the rear of the building to the north. And you can see it in relationship to the pre-existing soccer fields. And there's a nice connection to from the soccer fields to the entrance, to the rear entrance to the building now. So you can have, if it's weekends, again, as I said, you can zone off that lobby, but you could potentially have participants in events at these fields go into the building to use the restrooms, or for, if it's a camp or something, they could use the cafeteria, I suppose. As we mentioned, somewhere there will be a playground But you really, by putting the building closer to these fields, we've really unified the entire site. And Chris was right to say, as Jay also said, that this is a very complex site. It has a lot of regulatory restrictions. So we've really had to kind of squeeze the building into the only location we really could, but we believe that is possible. Here's a picture of the lobby. Looking towards the rear, looking towards those fields, the gym on your left, that stair I mentioned on your left as well. And you can go down a ramp or some stairs to get down a few feet to get then out to the rear site and also into that gym. And then this is looking the other direction with your back to those doors. And there you can look up and you can see the art room. And you can see the front doors in the rear there. This is the second floor outside of the art room that you were just looking at as you looked up. And that's looking back down into the lobby, and that's looking towards those lower elementary grades as well as the media center. So here you can again see that a parent, a member of the public, could come up for an art show. They could come up to use the media center after hours while the rest of the building was zoned off. There's a lot of nice ways the building can be utilized, both as a community building as well it should be, and as a functioning and school full of light, full of views, lots of light in the cafeteria. And then as we develop these corridors, as I mentioned, they will have both cubbies, but they'll also have areas for student learning on a more independent and less formal way, but it gives teachers kind of multiple options for how to teach and students multiple options for how to learn, and hopefully a little bit more informal way. Chris mentioned that I would talk about schedule very briefly. This shows the conceptual schedule that has been developed for the project. We are now, of course, at the beginning of 2023 right here. Unbelievable. How did we get there? I don't know, but you have the vote on January 7, and presuming that the project passes and proceeds, which we all hope it does, we will move right into design development and bid documents with the intent of completing those in early fall and bidding the project in the fall. That would allow construction to begin by the beginning of 2024 if a contractor was mobilizing at the end of 23. And then the contractor would have a little bit over a year and a half to construct the building so that it would be ready to be moved into by the beginning of school in 2025. So that is the intent. Typically with these projects, you try to have them completed by early summer. So there's a shakeout period. We have to get furniture in there. We got to get technology in there. We have to get teacher supplies and equipment in there. So that is the plan. And of course, students are, as I'm sure most people on this call are aware, are being relocated to the Parkhurst School as part of this proposal, which means they would be moving for the beginning of the school year next year in order to free up the site for the beginning of construction. So that is what I have initially for a presentation, and hopefully that looked a little bit larger on your screen, although much of it Chris has already ably described.
Thank you, Charlie. So before I hand it off to Rich Mucci, and we've got a growing list of attendees tonight. For those who joined a little late, our intention is to take questions from the audience. And I see someone has already posted something here, which is great. We're going to ask you to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen if you could type in your question. And then when we're done, Jay is going to review those questions and figure out who to throw them to, whoever's the responsible party for that. We have maybe 10 or 15 minutes left in the presentation. Rich is going to take a few minutes and go over the neighborhood traffic work that's covered under question 2. And then I'll wrap up with some comments on where you can find information on that swing space plan. We'll talk a little bit about project costs, including that exciting news from the MSBA in December, and also how you can continue to ask questions on the project. So with that, Rich, you should be able to share if you want to do that. Mr. Mucci.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you, everyone, for attending tonight. Hopefully you can see this. Just put it into slideshow. Can everyone see this as a slideshow at this point?
We can see it there, your over presentation button right now. If you click that, there you go. Looks
Thanks.
good.
All right, thanks everyone. Charlie, thank you for going through the project in more detail. This is exciting. If this is built for the town, it'll be a great community center, as you can see. Be a flagship elementary school for the town. Very exciting to see for the neighborhood and really transformative for Winchester. Much like the VO project of years ago. I know it seemed like it was yesterday, but it has been several years at this point. This has the ability to really be not only a school asset, but a community asset as well, especially with those soccer fields there and the outside plans and the ability to cordon off this building. My understanding is the building is 23% bigger than the current Lynch. So obviously the select board's concern from lessons learned with other previous projects was neighborhood traffic, making sure that there's ways for people to bike, walk, and travel to the school safely. So in 2018, after the VO project, the select board adopted a policy wherein they requested that traffic study be done in any capital or expansive school project in order to look at the infrastructure, how it would be impacted by the project, and to recommend capital improvements to any type of transit-oriented sidewalks or roadways to make sure that everything was connected and people had the ability to get safely to and from the school. So with that, this spring, we were excited that town meeting voted to fund a traffic study, $75,000 for the Lynch corridor and these two neighborhoods that abut the Lynch property. The goal was to alleviate any concerns and increase traffic to the new Lynch, which I mentioned was about 23% bigger. Address known high vehicle speeds, wide intersection geometry, and long distances and gaps in the pedestrian network, which basically means the sidewalks up on Pond Street and in the Horn Pond Brook neighborhood area, making sure that kids and pedestrians had a safe route to school. Improve the street network around Lynch with the goal of enhancing and connecting people for walking and biking, as I just said, and then slowing turning traffic down on Pond Street to make sure it was safe while kids were actually in the active roadways. Just the update of the timeline. In the spring, like I said, town meeting funded the traffic study, tool design completed the study and over the summer, shared those results with the select board in September of this year. We had a couple of October public forums, presented to TTAC in October, and then determined if costs could be part of the MSBA project and be part of question one, which ultimately it was determined that we were best to go with a separate override question, and that's why we have two override questions on the ballot for Saturday. On November 7th, the select board unanimously voted to put on a general override question to fund these traffic improvements, which I'm about to go through. And that's how we've landed where we are today with a question 2 on the ballot for Saturday's election. These are the locations that Tool Design, which is our outside traffic consultant, identified based on crash history, public input, volumes, running numbers that need to be improved in the neighborhood and fuel the recommendations that Tool Design came up with. I'll go through each one individually real fast. But essentially, if you're looking here, this is on the Pond Street side, and you can see Pond Street in both slides. You see the connections with Norfolk Road and Chesterford Road up in the left-hand area of the slide. Anything that's animated, you see green, you see cement, and you see sidewalks. Those are all part of the traffic improvements. So what they're doing here is narrowing the gap in that roadway. If anyone's driven on there recently, they know that at some times the cars don't even need to slow down to make those turns onto Chesterford or Norfolk. They can, and the crosswalks are extremely large. What this does is it eliminates the ability to kind of fly through those intersections and makes cars actually have to stop and turn on these roadways. It also limits the size of the crosswalks in order to make them safer for pedestrians to walk this route to school. So we have two intersections in the left-hand corner and then one below that would be bumped out, much like we did in front of the middle school. recently on both sides. So we have Woodside Avenue at the bottom there. This is just an animation of what Pond Street at Woodside would look like after the completion. As you can see, the sidewalk is greatly reduced. So kids are in the active roadway for less time. There's more space on either corner, ADA compliant. And as you can see now, any car that's turning off of Pond Street with that median strip there would need to actually, stop and turn rather than just, accelerate as they go through. This would make it certainly safer for kids to walk to and from school in this area. Next up is the intersection of Sylvester Road and Royal Street. In this area on the Horn Pond Brook side, we looked at really slowing traffic down on this straightaway with raised crosswalks right in front of the school on Hornbrook Parkway as well. There's a four-way intersection as you enter Lynch. What we did there, what Tool Design is recommending is raised crosswalks, bumping out crosswalks to make them, again, shorter crossing. Again, slowing traffic down, getting people to stop, and making it visible and connecting pedestrians for safer routes to school. This is a rendering of that raised crosswalk right in front of the school. As you're looking here, straight ahead of you would be the new entrance to the school. To the right there is what I think is planned, a pedestrian bridge over to the new Lynch School. But again, slowing traffic in this area, hopefully easing congestion by making these pathways safer and connected, hopefully encourages more walkers and bikers to the school rather than everyone traveling by car. On Middlesex Street, you can see again more raised crosswalks by Horn Pond Brook Road, Canal Street, and also on Middlesex Street. Right now, that's all pavement at number 8 as it turns down that way. What we'd like to do there is kind of bump out that intersection, put a continuous crosswalk so kids aren't literally walking in the middle of the street as they walk down that road on that side. They can walk on a safe crosswalk and then cross safely at those intersections. This is the intersection at Canal and Middlesex. Again, just visualizing those raised crosswalks and the speed tables that would essentially, hopefully slow down traffic in that area at all hours of the day. Up on Main Street, there are 2 projects as we do have commuters that go to the school in that area. One at the corner of Middlesex Street and Lake Street, and then one right by the DPW building at Linden Street. Again, bumping out those crosswalks, making them safer, increasing the visual ability of drivers to see people in those crosswalks and turning radiuses would help connect kids and parents to crosswalks and sidewalks for safer travel to and from school. So ultimately, what Tool did was they came up with these projects. They didn't prioritize them. We have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 projects. As you can see here, we have tier 1 and 2 and the costs estimated with those. Tier 3 and 4 and the costs estimated with those types of projects. Ultimately, the select board, after hearing all the data and hearing that the total costs were in approximately $2.9 million range, felt that given the nature of the school, the existing neighborhoods, and to encourage more pedestrian and biking to the school to ease traffic, the select board felt it was important that all projects go forward. And we ended up then trying to figure out a funding mechanism, which is what we landed on a general override question as part of the election for January 7th. So what is the general override and how does this impact the community financially? Well, it wasn't included in question 1 because, and not a debt exclusion override, because the town wants to have full control over the street and sidewalk projects. If we were to include in question 1, there was some question of how much control the town would have in those types of projects. It's a general override question. The board, majority of the board felt it was important that this should be a general override question, meaning that it wouldn't end after we paid off the debt service on this type of project, which would be about 15 years for debt service of $300,000 annually. And it would basically be $56 a household annually added to the tax levy to do these improvements. Select board felt there's no higher priority than improving neighborhoods around our schools and traffic safety around our schools. That's been a consistent theme with the select board, for the better part of a couple of decades now as we go through these projects. And certainly, I've heard people ask, well, aren't there other priorities in town? I think anybody at any time can talk about intersections and intersections need to be fixed, but certainly, when we have them closest to school, I think we all agree that that's, certainly the biggest priority in the select board's mind. Again, lessons learned from VO. It wasn't too long ago that we didn't have a traffic light at Ridge Street in front of VO. And, we're lucky to have that, unfortunately to have that now. But certainly at the time VO was renovated, that didn't exist, and it created significant safety concerns along with the connectivity of crosswalks in the area as that school grew in size and scope. So certainly lessons learned, and the select board feels that this is the right path. Certainly they feel the best way is a general override question. The override question funds the capital stabilization fund of up to $400,000. It is our hope and intent that the capital committee would then commit that money to fund these projects and honor the will of the vote, which would be to use the funds for this project. We have $400,000 on the ballot question, and that is because we want to make sure we're including enough money for once these are actually designed. Right now, these are just concepts designed and engineered, and with further input from the public to make sure that we have enough funds to cover any additions, such as rapid flashing traffic beacons or other crosswalks and intersections that haven't been identified, or tweaking these designs, that we certainly have enough money to do so. So that's why the question is the way it is. And, we're hoping that you will support this as an extension of the Lynch School project. It's exciting to see the school be built in this beautiful way. And I think it will be meaningful for the community, but certainly we want to make sure that there's safe access to it via bike and pedestrian, as well as controlling speed in the area. With that, Chris, I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Okay. Thank you, Rich. Nice job. So let me, I'm going to jump back in to wrap this up. And I'm actually, I'm going to mention something that I failed to earlier, but Rich did in his presentation. Back on the Lynch 2025 website, and I'm on the, should be on the site page, I am. So this is a site plan, a little smaller than the one Charlie shared with you. Rich mentioned something about a bridge. This is an important thing just to sort of point out conceptually. The current Lynch, and I hope you can follow my cursor, that thin red line, this kind of outlines where Lynch is today. There is a pedestrian accommodation on that vehicular bridge that goes across Horn Pond Brook today. But because the new Lynch moves basically to the north, there is literally no way students walking to school can get to the new Lynch without having to cross vehicular traffic. So that was a real concern to the EFPBC. And we had interest in providing something like the wood or the timber bridge that some residents may be familiar with down off of Mystic Valley Parkway that connects to the Ginn Playground. This is one of many things on Charlie's plate in terms of design. There isn't a design yet to share, and it falls squarely in the middle of areas that the Conservation Commission has a lot of interest and appropriately sort of authority charged to kind of protect the environment. So this is going to be a design challenge, a sort of permitting challenge, but this is that element that Rich was mentioning. So we want to describe that to you. Whether it really lands this close to the bridge today, or if it's a little further back into the woods, remains yet to be seen, but we thought this is an important way to accommodate more kids walking to school. So with that, let me jump back to, I'm going to go to the swing space traffic and safety page. So first of all, for anybody who wasn't taking notes super fast while Rich was talking, we've provided kind of a summary of his information on the project website. So you can learn a little more about that select board policy from 2018 that Rich just described. I will also want to point out that on October 18th, town manager, I need to change this, Rich. Beth is now the town manager, not acting town manager, but she was also wearing two hats, town engineer at the time. Beth Rudolph held some information sessions with the neighborhood on October 18th. For anyone interested in seeing what those meetings looked like, those are recorded. They're on YouTube, and you can click here on this link to the town's page, and for links to those presentations. Some images here that Rich shared with you tonight are also on the website, as well as the question under question 2, and some images here of some of that neighborhood traffic work. So this is kind of a landing spot for if folks want more information. With respect to swing space, we talked a little bit about, Charlie did mention Parkhurst. So for folks not familiar, Parkhurst is a lot like the Mystic School. It's 2 stories, it's built into a hill. It's a bit newer than Mystic, thankfully. It was built in 48, it was expanded in 1952. It was one of our regular neighborhood elementary schools into the late 1970s. It served as swing space for VO students for 2 years during construction, having been mothballed for a few years after it had also provided the same function for Ambrose. So from 05 to 06, this is where Ambrose students went to school. This has been the location of central office since VO moved into the new building in 2013. And Dr. Hackett, who's with us tonight, has been kind of moving some of his team off-site and developing plans to find space for everybody else. The integrated preschool that used to exist at Lynch will return when the new building opens in the fall of 25. Today, that preschool program is split between the Vincent Owens School, where I think we have 2 classrooms or 2 sections, and at the Parkhurst School. Dr. Hackett's preference is to keep that preschool program that exists today at the lower level. And so we're going to accommodate those Lynch students on the upper level of Parkhurst in addition to some modular classroom buildings. Our OPM, Hill International, has been working on a set of bid documents for the modulars themselves. Charlie and his team are developing a package of improvements to Parkhurst and other elements of the site. So that's going to come into focus really in the next month. And if you want to learn more about that, tune in to the next EFPBC meeting. Having said that, let me jump to costs. And this is probably almost a good point to end on tonight. So folks who've been following the project website will see some changes here. We actually do call this out as a January update. At the December 21st board meeting, as we mentioned at the opening of the meeting, for those joining late tonight, we were really thrilled and frankly somewhat surprised that the MSBA voted unanimously to raise the construction cost cap for the project. So the MSBA will reimburse communities a certain percentage of eligible expenses. The eligible cost per square foot had been $360. They raised that to, I think it was $432, which is a significant increase. They also made some adjustments to what's reimbursable for site work, as well as some of our soft costs along the lines of designers and OPMs. The reimbursement, the rate, the percentage from the MSBA did not change. The project budget did not change. So what that simply means is, if you think about the project cost sort of within a box, the MSBA has basically now said, we're going to make some adjustments out of concern for escalation and construction. And they're now going to be contributing an additional it's about $2.88 million to the maximum facilities grant. So this was great news, came right before Christmas. We're going to get some more money, and the net effect is there's less borrowing for Winchester. So for those who've been following this closely on the website, I've highlighted in yellow what has changed. So very quickly, the building that Charlie described tonight in his detailed presentation, that new Lynch, is estimated to carry about a 65.4 cost in terms of construction. And when we say construction, we're talking about the stuff and the labor to build the building. So it's excavation, foundation. There's a breakdown here you see on the page on the left. Excavation, foundation, structure. It's the envelope. It's walls, windows. It's a roof. It's HVAC. It's electrical, walls, painting. It's really all the stuff you see and the labor to put it in place. That's what construction cost is. So for the new Lynch, it's about $65.4 million. But that's not our project budget. Our project budget is far greater. It's nearly $30 million more. And there's a reason for that because there's so many other elements that contribute to project cost. Again, if you follow me along here, the MSBA project grant has now been increased. It's going to be between 19.9 to 20.3 at the max. That gives us a net project cost of $74 to $74.5 million. And what that means is Winchester will borrow no more than $74.5 million for this project. Because once we get started, Vivian and her team will evaluate the invoices that come in from the contractor. They get submitted to the state. And within, I think, as little as 14 or 15 days, they cut us a check. So we never have to borrow the full amount of the project budget. Now, there's a reason why the project grant has a little bit of wiggle room to it. And that's because there are some, we have a lot of contingencies on the project, which Charlie could speak to later if there are questions about it. But the contingencies are an important element of our strategy about how to pull this project off. Some of those contingencies might actually be reimbursable by the state. So depending upon what we spend from the contingency and what we spend it on, we might actually get some extra reimbursement. But that 19.9 to 20.3 is really a pretty tight figure. So there's an explanation here of what construction cost is. Now, in addition to the new lynch, which I told you was 65.4, we have to abate and demolish the existing lynch today. That's estimated at about $2.3 million. And then Charlie, as I said a moment ago, he and his team are putting together a package for architectural and engineering improvements to the Parkhurst School. It's about $500,000 plus minus. We're carrying that as a construction cost because we see that as a permanent investment in our facilities. Now, that's very different than the modular classrooms. We're actually going to be leasing those. They're going to be temporary. They're going to show up, and after 2 years, they disappear. They're not cheap, but they're temporary. So all in, we're looking at a total construction cost for the project of $68.2 million. Now, with respect to project costs, it's all those other things beyond construction costs that contribute to a project. So that's the architecture and engineering fees, our project management fees, legal fees, owner-provided items such as furniture, fixtures, and equipment, testing and inspectional services, and so forth. So there's a breakdown of this for the public on the cost page that helps you understand how we get to that total project budget. So for starters, we again go back to the new building, 65.4. We have the abatement and demolition. We've got our Parkhurst upgrades. We estimate we're going to spend about $5 million leasing those modular classrooms and some site work to accommodate them, as well as some restoration to the site when they're gone. We've got construction and owners contingencies at $7.5 million, $9.5 million in design and management fees. Those owner provided items, including educational technology I mentioned, come in at nearly $3 million. We've got about $500,000 allocated for testing, utility fees, and other costs. Now, the MSBA also requires us, as part of their process in the ballot question, to include in the overall project cost the cost of the feasibility study. That's $980,000. This has already been funded. It was funded 2 years ago by town meeting. So we're not going to borrow that money again. We're not going to spend it again, but we have to sort of roll that into the overall project cost. So this is how we get to that $94.5 million project budget. Less that reimbursement that was revised on December 21st, we're looking at a not to exceed project cost, $74.2 million. Now that is if we spend every nickel and dime of the project budget. The EFPBC over many years, I think, has done a great job getting projects in on schedule and actually under budget. And our goal certainly is to underspend that. Brief description here for the community if they're interested on a little more detail about how we derive that net project cost. And then again, just to pick up on a point Mr. Mucci was making earlier, there's a distinction made on this cost page between an operating override, which is what question 2 is about. That's really a permanent increase in the tax levy limit, albeit it's a small one for question 2, versus a debt exclusion. So a debt exclusion does raise our taxes, but only to pay off a project. And when we're done, the debt goes away. So it's a lot like having a 20 or 30-year mortgage. So what we wanted people to know is that the town's bonding consultant has evaluated the current market, taken into account the town's bond rating through Moody's, and with some guidance from management towards perhaps a 30-year term. And with what we know today about the overall net project cost, the town's consultants have estimated that the project, should it pass on Saturday, given prevailing interest rates, given what we know about project cost, this would increase property taxes at about $54.23 per $100,000 of assessed value. I hope everybody can read that down there on the lower right. For the average home value in Winchester, which is about $1.26 million, that impact would be $685 a year. Again, that's going to go up or down depending upon your assessment. It's important for me to just make this point, especially with Mr. Mucci here tonight. It really is the select board that ultimately makes a decision on things like bonding terms. So for some projects, we've bonded 20 years. If the select board wanted a bond for 20, it's going to be more expensive, but we pay it off faster. To this point, all the discussion has been around a 30-year bond. And unless Mr. Mucci has anything to say otherwise, that would be my assumption, but we just want to be really clear that that's something the select board really needs to discuss and evaluate once we get a little further along in the project and we're in a place where we need to actually start borrowing money. So hopefully that's helpful for everybody. With respect to questions, and again, I remind people, it looks like we have 3 questions in the Q&A, so we're about to get to them. We have an FAQ page that I also want to point out to folks. If you go to the FAQ page, you're going to find something here I want to be sure we touched on tonight. We have an email address for this project. This will remain live, by the way. If the project passes on Saturday, as I hope it does, the project will continue. You can email questions to the project's communications team at lynch2025faq@gmail.com. Our team's Deb DePeter, it's Dr. Hackett, Tom Hopcroft, Lisa Matrandola, and myself who review those questions, and we kick them either to the superintendent if it's a district issue, or EFPBC, or management, what have you. And so if you scroll through the page, you'll see we've gotten some really great questions as the project has begun to move forward. So we welcome those questions, and we would encourage you to use that email address to send them. If anybody wants to kind of go back in time, you want to understand what the EFPBC has been working on, really want to give props to WinCam. They record all of our EFPBC meetings. They're recording tonight, so you can go back in time and find some of the presentations here if you're so interested. We also have a page here where we try to pick up a lot of the media coverage on the project. And then lastly, being a Morocco parent myself, Morocco district, maybe this is a good point to end on because it really is important. I follow the analytics on the website. This remains a pretty popular page. Why Lynch? Why not Morocco? What about Morocco? So just to maybe end it on this note, for 3 years in a row, the school committee and select board jointly submitted statements of interest to the MSBA to rebuild both Lynch and Morocco. They invited us to do so with Lynch. We remain committed to a permanent solution for Morocco. We went to a town meeting in 2020. We requested nearly $4 million for what we call the Morocco Life Extension Plan to make investments in the roof, the mechanical systems, plumbing systems in the building that will really sustain Morocco until a replacement, which our goal is sometime between 2028, and 2030. We remain really committed to this. So if folks want to learn more about what we're doing at Morocco today, you can certainly visit the website, watch the video. The roof work is largely complete. I won't put Meg on the spot, although she's with us on the call tonight. A lot of roof work has already been completed. We've repaired or replaced large sections of roof, done some masonry repair, and we have a brand new heating system that went into the building last fall. And more work lies ahead for Morocco, but we really are committed to a long-term replacement of that building because we call for it in the master plan. So with that, I'm just going to go back to the homepage, Jay, and I think I'll shut up. It is like 4 minutes after 7. Do you want to plow through the Q&A, Jay?
Yes.
And I'll just remind people, go to the Q&A in your Zoom window and you can type questions, and Jay will be happy to send them to whoever can best answer your question.
So Rich and Frank, thank you, have been knocking them off as well. I've been trying to answer a few, but the first one that's been waiting out there is Hon Pond side, the view from Hon Pond side of the school. And I think that's best for Charlie, if you could answer that. And I don't know if we're at that point yet with landscaping.
No, I think I can answer that. If I'm allowed to share a screen, I will.
You should be able to, Charlie.
Okay. And I'm going to go to back to the PowerPoint, I hope. So if the site plan is there, I hope.
Yes.
So on the Hornbrook side, the intention is not to have no trees. So any pre-existing trees within right along adjacent to Horn Pond Brook will remain, certainly within the resource area. And the existing parking that is on the along the brook at the end of the existing lynch is actually going to be removed, and the green space will be widened at that location. Above where the roadway comes in, those trees will remain back essentially to a point where there's right now kind of a gravel walk that goes back towards the fields. So furthermore, there are trees being proposed adjacent to the new parking areas and supplementing along the tree line to the south. So effectively, the proposal is not to remove trees that exist along the Hornbrook or Horn Pond Brook there. The proposal is to retain them. And I think that this rendering also kind of shows that the brook is here where my cursor is. Those trees are pre-existing trees. They're not being removed. This rendering, you're right, the questioner makes a very good point. On this rendering, you don't see those trees, but the actual site plan does show them, and the intent is to put them in. And we've had preliminary and informal conversations with Conservation Commission. As Chris mentioned, we intend to continue those conversations and then, of course, come before them formally for their review in the spring or early summer. The other site-related question that I was also waiting to answer till I had a picture is what is the difference in level going to be between the school and the fields? There's no intention to raise the fields. The fields will remain at the level they are now, and there's no real intention to lower the school. The school will essentially be sitting at, give or take, a foot or two at the level of the existing lynch. But we don't expect there will be a quote unquote steep hill. There will be a hill along the edge, but the site plan will connect to the existing pathway that goes down to the fields now. This playground that I talked about earlier shows a little retaining wall there. So that would be holding back a little bit of earth, but that playground also may move. There's been discussion about getting it up higher and closer to the school, and that's just something we have to study. But there's not a significant difference in what there is now, but we don't expect it. It certainly will be a fully accessible egress between the door of the school and or the doors of the school, the rear doors of the school, and the level of the play fields. So those were the two site questions.
Yeah, there's one more that just came in, Charlie.
Okay.
We'll skip the third question for now.
I haven't seen it.
Plans for additional shade, throwing trees closer to the school.
Right. So within the context of course, of having solar panels, there are shade trees proposed along where the pre-K play is. There are trees proposed along where the outdoor classroom is in front of the building. And there are trees both to the east and to the west of the play area, this to the south of the building. And on the north, as you can see in this plan, there are a number of trees planted along the northerly edge of the site that would also provide shade, although on this side of the building, we wouldn't expect there to be so much need for shade. But the intention, and there's also a small, nice little feature, there's also a very small outdoor area outside of the CAF where, some students could possibly go out there either for an informal class or for outdoor dining. That also shows trees. So we are showing trees at most of these kind of outdoor spaces right now, as well as these kind of longer sort of rows of trees that are kind of defining the outdoor play area, defining the parking lot. And then, of course, on the Brantwood side, there's an existing grove of trees that will remain that are right to the west of the existing school, and those are being maintained in this plan.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I'm Charlie. I had answered the contingency issue, but Vivian, if you want to go in more detail, that would be great. I'd answered online.
I think, Chris, you had mentioned you wanted to respond to that question.
Oh,
So, so the question, let's see, do I still see it? Maybe it's gone. Let me pull it up. So the question, where did it go? Where did it go? I'm looking for it. If all contingency funds are not spent, how will the unspent funds be returned to taxpayers, or do they go into the general fund of the town? And I'm glad Rich is with us tonight to sort of hear this question. So first of all, I just want to zoom out and say, for most of our major school capital projects, we've been in an environment where money has been virtually free because interest rates have been so low. Although, you know, being I remember back when interest rates were 15, 16%. So relatively speaking, it's been worse. But we're clearly in an environment where interest rates are going up. So our past practice, and we did this on the high school, was we borrowed sort of large tranches of money as the project went forward. So we were kind of borrowing money a little bit ahead of when we knew we would need it. And that's based on a pretty detailed cash flow that Tappe and Hill have developed for us on this project, and we've done on others. What's a little unique in our current climate is every time the Fed Reserve meets, they raise interest rates. So they just added 50 basis points at the last meeting. People are expecting they're going to increase again. Who knows if it's going to be 25 or 50 basis points and for how much longer. So because we're in an escalatory environment in terms of interest rates, the town's consultant, one of their models is sort of suggesting might be in our interest to actually borrow most of the money earlier up front. And some of those models include borrowing as much as 90 or 95% of the budget sometime this spring. The idea being, let's borrow it earlier before rates go higher. But as I said at the outset, this is something that Rich and his colleagues are going to be having a lot of conversations about, because what the market looks like with respect to rates 2 weeks from now, I mean, I have no idea what's going to happen. And there's so many economic indicators that are in conflict with one another and seem to be changing almost, you know, every week or two. So, but to get sort of to the question, the recommendation, one of the models, I hesitate to say recommendation, was that let's say 90 to 95% could be borrowed early, and that would substantially fund the project until, let's say, the spring of 25. So that would give us a good 2 years of progress. And that by that point, the project team would have a much better sense of how much additional money would be necessary to close it out. By that point, all of the bids have come in, contracts have been awarded. One of the greatest risks in any kind of project is excavation, earth retention. So when you get out of the ground, it's a real moment to celebrate on a project, because you never know what you're going to find when you dig a hole, especially in Winchester. So I think, you know, Rich, what I love about the question is, I think a conversation maybe the select board could have with management might be, you know, does it make sense to reserve that second borrowing for something close to everything we've set aside for contingency? So that might be $7.5 or $8 million. I think the modeling shows it a little bit lower than that today. But the plan is simply to borrow more of the money up front, but that will be informed by, frankly, how the bids look like when they come in. Those contingencies are there to help us if there is an overage in one sort of construction line or another. And perhaps, Jay, if I can put Meg White on the spot for a moment, I think when we borrow, because this is a debt exclusion override, we're very limited on what those funds can be attributed to. We couldn't take the money, for instance, and do another intersection. If folks were, you know, beating Rich's door down to do another intersection, we'd really have to spend it on the project. So if everything is closed out and there's no other eligible project expense, then that money would be returned. I'm not sure if it goes to the general fund. I wonder if Meg could clarify that. I think it comes back to town meeting for a closeout.
It would either, either we wouldn't borrow the full amount, or we would then bring it back to town meeting to be reappropriated towards another debt exclusion project.
Thank you. But this is all, these are really good questions, and it's something I think once, once we get through Saturday, I presume this is going to be a pretty big agenda item for Rich and his board to begin to figure out.
Yeah, Chris, if I could just jump in, you're absolutely right. Certainly, we have a financial advising team that we would rely heavily on in making these decisions. And obviously interest rates are a fluid situation right now, but everything you said is true, and certainly something that will weigh on our mind if this should pass on Saturday and become an agenda item relatively quickly.
Okay, there's one more question that came in regarding, I think, Charlie, if you can answer this, if there's a view of Middlesex, Hon Pond, Brook Road.
I think that's Jay. I think that's actually for me. I think that's.
Is there an animated? It looks like a question, but maybe it is.
Yeah, let me pull up my screen again. So I think the question is, what happens to the parking in front of number 8 here? So
okay, you're correct.
So this is much like what happened. I think it was Everett Ave by the boat club when we did this bump out. Again, these are concepts. Certainly, more input will be vetted with the neighborhood. But as you can see, the street kind of changes its landscape. So yes, there'll be parking, but it might be a further walk up to those houses in that area. But you can see parking down, I don't know if I can see my cursor, but right in this area right here. So I hope that answered that question.
Okay. Anyone else? Any other questions?
So we're at 7:19, Jay. We've got about 10 more minutes. Maybe last call for questions if folks want to use their Q&A. Really appreciate the attendance tonight and the great questions from everybody.
Okay. I don't see anything coming in, so I think we can wrap it up.
All right. Well, why don't we do that? We were one member short of a quorum tonight, Jay, so we don't have to produce minutes, so that's great. I want to thank WinCam again for they're broadcasting this tonight on channel 22 on Comcast, and that should be available for streaming in a couple of days. When it is, we'll throw it up on the website if anybody wants to access that before the vote. Reminding everybody the election is on Saturday the 7th and is at Winchester High School. You should have received a mailing from Rich and his board. I got one a couple of weeks ago. As I said on the project website, if you've got questions about voting, outside of Saturday, there are some options for that. These links are live. The town clerk, if you click the town clerk, see the vote in Winchester page, you click this, you go straight to Mary Ellen Lannon's page. Gives you some options on how you can vote for both question 1 and question 2. So with that, I guess we're done, Jay. I want to thank Vivian and Charlie for being here. Can we, Vivian has her hand up. Maybe we ask Vivian and Charlie any closing thoughts.
More than a closing thought, there is a gentleman that has his hand raised as part of the attendees. I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't overlooked if he has a question.
I didn't see that. If anybody has any questions, you just need to type them into the Q&A. That might be WB here.
Someone by the name of William Band has his hand raised. Oh, he just lowered it. Nope, he raised it.
Yeah, you can, welcome to type questions in the Q&A. Getting some good feedback on the website, including tonight, which is great. Really also just want to encourage folks to use that. And again, I'll show everybody where to find it. That FAQ page. Let me get back to it here quickly. If you go to Lynch 2025, there we go. Forgive me, bring it up one more time. Okay, right here at the top of the page, you just click on FAQ and there's a link. So feel free to type any questions that you have on the project. If you're unable to do it tonight, you think of questions later. The superintendent's a part of this group as well. We certainly appreciate there are a lot of operational questions. And if there are questions about question 2, some of the neighborhood traffic and safety improvements that Rich described tonight, feel free to, you can use this link, send those questions along, and we'll send those to Rich as well. And he will have your contact information. So with that, I think we say good night.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Yep, thanks,
you.
guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Nice
Frank,
job.
for thank you, Dr. Hackett, for running this tonight. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody.
All right, everybody have a
Have a good
happy new
night.
year. See ya.
Happy New
Happy
Year.
New Year.